Everyone, and welcome to our third GFI Link seminar. My name is Carlotta Lucas. I'm the Good Food Institute Europe's Corporate Engagement Manager. I'm also joined today by my colleagues and co-creators of this initiative, Marika Azoff and Molly O'Donnell. Marika is GFI US's Corporate Engagement Specialist, and Molly O'Donnell is GFI US's Corporate Engagement Coordinator. You'll be hearing from both of them at various points in today's seminar as well. For those of you who are attending your first LINK seminar, LINK stands for Learn, Inspire, Network, and Collaborate. Over the years, GFI has received feedback from various stakeholders that our team interacts with, including food manufacturers and suppliers, that there was a desire for more opportunities to connect and collaborate with other companies in the space. And while we can facilitate one-on-one introductions, we wanted to provide a space for industry stakeholders such as yourselves to convene, learn together, network, and collaborate. So we founded the LINK community based upon the belief that by convening a diverse range of stakeholders, we can really drive industry-wide change and grow the entire sector in a way that benefits all. So we hold seminars once a quarter, and each session is dedicated to a specific topic that GFI's research indicates is critical to addressing industry bottlenecks and accelerating the growth of the alternative protein sector. Today's topic is the future of cultivated meat and seafood, consumer acceptance, insights, and opportunities. And we're diving into this topic because while the benefits of cultivated meat and seafood are well established, like the ability to produce meat that is identical to conventional animal meat, but more sustainably, decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, water pollution, and antibiotic resistance. The success of cultivated meat and seafood is really directly tied to consumer acceptance. And this topic is especially relevant now, as just last month, the US FDA gave the green light to a cultivated chicken product from Upside Foods as part of the agency's pre-market review process. And so with this news, Upside Foods will now be able to move onto the standard process comparable to conventional chicken products to bring these products to market together with the US Department of Agriculture. So this decision is really a major milestone and paves the way for consumers to be able to purchase these products for the first time in US restaurants and retail. So today we will hear from researchers and industry experts about the state of consumer acceptance of cultivated meat and seafood globally, and how to increase acceptance through consumer education and effective messaging. You can see the agenda on the slide here. Today's seminar will be an hour long, followed by a 30-minute networking session on the platform Meetaway, which I'll explain shortly. And we'll start off by a 5-minute introduction and presentation from each of our 4 speakers, before we dive into a panel discussion moderated by Marika. We are recording this seminar. All of you will receive a link to the recording as well as the presentations that you'll be seeing and a feedback survey after the seminar. And last, you've all already been pre-registered for the networking session. So if you'd like to attend, which I sincerely hope you do, I will direct everyone to the platform after our panel's discussion. And Marika is adding that link in the chat right now, and we will do so again at the end of the presentation. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker of the day, Carrie Shada, founder and principal scientist at North Mountain Consulting Group, who is going to give us an overview of consumer acceptance of cultivated meat and seafood around the globe. So over to you, Carrie.
Okay, hi everyone. Just a moment while I share my screen. Okay. Yeah, so thank you so much for coming. I'm excited to share some data today. A little bit about us. We're a research and communication consulting firm, specialize in message design and consumer research on scientific topics that impact our planet, especially novel foods and other emerging technologies. So today I'm going to share a broad overview of some of the research we have that is open access globally. And these studies, these studies also share similar methodology and the same measurement, so it's helpful in comparing that. So, and also just want to thank, we have, funders that allow this to access, including Food System Research Fund, and Animal Charity Evaluators, Credence Institute, GFI, and Olive Farms. Okay, so the first question people want to know is, will people try? And the answer is definitely yes. So what you see in teal, the bars here, are the people that said that they were very or extremely likely to try cultivated meat. Okay, so we're looking at anywhere from 1/3 to about 2/3 of our samples that are very enthusiastic about trying. And then when we add in those who are a little bit more hesitant, they say they are somewhat or moderately likely to try, then we're getting pretty close to all of our samples. Okay. And I'll show you what the next one also just shows the, in orange are the rejectors. Okay, so those are the people who say not at all likely, and there's really not a lot of them. Okay. We look at demographic characteristics to see if we can find, any differences in early adopters. So these are the people that are very or extremely likely to try, and how many there are for each generation. So we do see a general trend of younger generations being more likely to try, but it's not a dramatic difference, and it's not in every country. When we did the research in Kenya, Nigeria, and Egypt, that was this past year. So we had the opportunity to ask about hybrid products for the first time. And so we have we asked them about plant-based and cultivated, and then a combination of the two, and found that hybrid acceptance is really on par with cultivated meat, fully cultivated meat, and in fact, just a little bit more accepting. I will ask participants to imagine themselves in the future when there's lots of products on the market, they're accessible, they're affordable, they taste good. And so essentially ask them to think about their consumption over the course of the year and how they might slice up that pie. And we see quite consistently that people imagine eating multiple types of meat, including, all of them on their plate. These are, of course, averages across the samples, but we see that on an individual level as well, that it's really people that could think about eating all of these things in their diet, and that makes sense given that our target is omnivores. Okay, right. So that is my overview, and I will turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. That was a great overview. And I think it's super cool that you've also looked at hybrids, because I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit today. That is going to be really the next step before we maybe get a full cultivated product on the market. Well, then I think it's time to bring on our second speaker, Sophie Armour, a Senior Communications Manager at GFI Europe. And Sophie will share insights from the cultivated meat nomenclature and messaging research project she conducted. So Sophie, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Perfect. So great, yeah. As Carlotta said, my name is Sophie Armour, and I lead on communications for the Good Food Institute Europe. So a big part of my job is thinking about how we can drive a positive European narrative for sustainable proteins, including cultivated meat. So we had that great overview of where consumer acceptance is at from Carrie just now. I'm going to dive a little bit more into how we can encourage even more people, and maybe some of those people who were rejecting it initially, to embrace cultivated meat as a part of their diets. So as Carlotta mentioned, over the past year, I've been working with companies, advocates, pollsters, and communications professionals on a project to develop evidence-based messaging for cultivated meat in some of Europe's most important markets. Our study covered everything from consumer acceptance to which spokespeople consumers might trust. But today, I'm just going to focus on the messages that resonated with European consumers, and highlight some of the findings that I think might apply around the world. So just to caveat, this was just one early stage study. So our findings are by no means definitive, but hopefully they can provide a bit of a useful starting point for our conversations today. So based on a consultation with about 21 organizations involved in the sector, we decided to look for our study at France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. We analysed over 11,000 media articles, we surveyed over 1,000 people in each country, and we held focus groups to drill into what works and why. Now, these are 4 very different European markets with different languages, food cultures, and histories. So it was no surprise to us that existing acceptance of cultivated meat varied from country to country. Our findings were slightly different from Kerry's, but these are different markets. So we saw that in Spain, 65% of consumers were already willing to buy cultivated meat. And we saw, similar to Kerry, that acceptance figures among young people were even higher across the board. The figure we received in France was 33% overall, but we also found that almost half of French consumers had never actually heard of cultivated meat before. So there's definitely time for us to make a good first impression. Now, to do that, we found that framing cultivated meat in the language of food production rather than science was crucial. We found words like cells were off-putting because they evoked the world of laboratories and hospitals rather than of food and restaurants. The word bioreactor made one Italian think of nuclear power, and one German participant said that the phrase cell-based meat reminded them of the Matrix, which was not great. But when we described the process of meat cultivation as being similar to growing plants from cuttings in a greenhouse, our focus groups responded far more positively. And I suspect this is a pattern that we'll see repeated around the world. Now, when it came to the broader messaging approach, we found a few things worked well everywhere. Talking about tackling invasive for consumers across all of our markets, but other arguments were received quite differently in each country. So take land use as an example. Now, we all know that one of the benefits of cultivated meat is that it can use up to 95% less land than conventional meat production, freeing up space to restore forests and to farm sustainably. Now, in Germany and Italy, those arguments were intuitive and persuasive. But in France, they immediately triggered thoughts about the expropriation of farmers. And one person even thought that we wanted cows and chickens to be kept in labs. So a bit of room for confusion there. Now, where the French could be persuaded was with seafood. In France and Germany, the message that cultivated seafood could help to prevent overfishing worked well. One German participant was thrilled at the idea of being able to eat as much scampi as they'd like. But our Spanish and Italian focus groups were less convinced, feeling that existing regulations were effective in preventing overfishing already. So it's clear from our study that communicating about cultivated meat requires cultural sensitivity and a tailored approach to each country. But no matter where you're communicating about cultivated meat, I'd strongly advise you to frame your messages in the language of food and minimize scientific terminology as far as possible while still remaining accurate, of course. I expect you'll also find consumers everywhere connect with the potential of cultivated meat to reduce animal suffering and to help address climate change. But I'd encourage you to take the time to understand the audiences that you want to connect with. So I think by tapping into local concerns and positioning cultivated meat as a potential solution, you'll be able to maximize acceptance and support. So that's just a super brief overview from me, and looking forward to hearing more from the other speakers.
Thank you so much, Sophie. That was perfect. And I think actually a great segue into our next speaker, who is Ben Friedman, Chief Growth Officer of Wildtype, a cultivated seafood company. And Ben will share how Wildtype approaches pre-market consumer education and engagement. So Ben, over to you.
Thank you so much. And so nice to be with everyone this morning, albeit virtually. I'm Ben Friedman. I'm Chief Growth Officer at Wildtype. We make sushi grade cultivated salmon. I want to talk a little bit this morning, just building off previous presentations on how we think about pre-market consumer engagement, how we talk to consumers, how we craft messaging strategies. And I'm unfortunately not presenting my own slides, so I'm just going to be calling out next slide and next slide here, please. So the first pillar of our engagement strategy is to demystify the science. So just like any big engineering problem, we want to break it down into smaller parts. So we really focus on these three aspects of our process. One is our cells, or how we create our cell lines, where they come from, how we make them. Another is the scaffold, which is the plant-based structure that our cells grow on and within. And then the process of cell scaffold integration, which is really like how our product is made at the end of the day. We want to really simplify our process into layman's terms. We want to stay away from scientific nomenclature, like Sophie just alluded to, and we want to bring this down to a level that someone with like a middle school or a high school level science education can understand, like that type of word choice. Next slide, please. Another big part of our strategy is just to leverage analogy. So we, our first product and the first generation of products in the cultivated meat and seafood space will really be hybrids. They'll be a mix of plant-based material and cells. And so we think a lot about what other types of hybrids consumers are used to, and how long they've taken to develop into something that was beyond hybrid or fully electric in the case of a car. So we look at like the 20-year span between the 1997 introduction of the Prius and the 2022 Tesla Model 3. From nascent technology to mature technology, from something that's super low performance that you can't do everything that you want with, to something that's super high performance that maybe performs even better than what you're used to, from hybrid to fully electric. So we use analogies like electric cars. We use analogies like beer brewing and yeast to describe cell lines, bringing something that's very complicated and sophisticated that a lot of people need a master's or a PhD in cell biology to understand. We want to find real world examples that can sort of make it click in their heads for them. Next slide, please. And like Sophie said, that part of that process is translating science vernacular into food vernacular. So instead of saying lab grown, we say cultivated. We actually commissioned the study with Yale Center for Customer Insights that produced the phrase cultivated as the leading name for the category. When we launched that study, the industry was really playing around with cultured or cell cultured for the most part, and we found similar data that the use of the word cell as a modifier is not appealing, and that cultured had too many opportunities for confusion, especially with its common use in dairy, like with live cultures. And so I think that getting away from the word lab is also a big one, right? Bioreactor to cultivator, as Sophie mentioned. We don't call our pilot plant or any of our production facilities plants or facilities. We call them fishery. It's much like similar to like a brewery, just kind of focuses on the product rather than the production. Instead of growth media, we talk about it as like a fancy Gatorade. We break down its components into like layman's terms, like amino acids, fat, salt, sugars. Instead of scientific words like dissection to talk about how we started our cell line, we talk about isolation, like we isolate our cells rather than dissect animals. Things like that all contribute to helping consumers adopt a friendlier stance towards this emerging technology. Next slide, please. Another big one, and this is like, just across the food space in general, is like high appetite appeal is critical. Think of, beer commercials during a football game. Like you want that condensation on the glass. You want to be able to taste it through the screen. That's especially critical during this pre-market phase because, most people will only experience our product through a screen, and most people will only experience our product through a screen for years to come. It's going to be, limited availability at just a few restaurants around the world. It's going to be really hard to get reservations to try these products even after they launch. And so it's really important that we tell a culinary story. We leverage all of our experience in the food world to try to bring this product to life on Instagram or on our website. And I think that's really critical. Next slide. But I think it's really important that great photography and food styling is not enough. We have to normalize eating cultivated seafood in our case, or meat in the case of other companies. that's product going into somebody's mouth. You can have a glamour shot of in our case, sushi on a plate, and you can make it look as tantalizing and delicious as possible. But I think we'll really see mindsets change when people see other people eating it. And for us, that strategy has been based on influencer marketing. But I think for others, it's just showing people enjoying the product. I think that's really important. So that's it for me. But just a couple parts of our strategy to just engage consumers in a way that using language that they understand, and showing that the product is not just something that's food style, but really that is food that people are already enjoying. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ben. That was fantastic. All right. Our last speaker for this portion of today's seminar is Andrew Noyes. Andrew is the VP and Head of Global Communications and Public Affairs at Eat Just and Good Meat. And Andrew's going to provide us with an overview of how Good Meat actually introduced cultivated meat to consumers in Singapore. So I think the perfect way to wrap up this section. So Andrew, the floor is yours.
Sorry, just had to get off mute there. Apologies. So glad to be a part of this important webinar today. And as the team said, I'm just going to walk you through some of the steps that we took to bring Good Meat, our cultivated chicken product, to market in Singapore. And just a little background, Singapore was the first country in the world to ever give regulatory approval for a cultivated meat product. That was given to us in November of 2020. And within a couple of weeks, we were ready to launch with our first food service partner, a restaurant called 1880. And since that time, it's wild to believe that it's been almost 2 years since our first customers enjoyed it. We've sought to introduce our chicken product in a variety of ways. We wanted to ensure that we did it in a way that was relevant to the culture that we were launching in, and equitable. So ensuring that in addition to serving our product in fine dining establishments, that we also served it in a number of other ways that got it in people's mouths. One of the complicating factors, as you all know, is that we launched in the middle of a global pandemic. There were frequent COVID-related shutdowns, lockdowns in Singapore, and so we had to get very creative about how we were launching our product. Just quickly, our company has been a first on a number of fronts. First, as I mentioned, to approval, regulatory. First, to large scale. We have a partnership with a company called ABEC. One of the big biotech design manufacturing companies in the space to create very large scale vessels to grow meat in, and as I mentioned, first to market. It's a quick snapshot of a study that we did looking at how likely consumers would be to—
Andrew, sorry, it's Marika here. Sorry to interrupt you. Your slides aren't progressing. So we still just see the first slide, and they're beautiful slides. So I don't want folks to miss out.
Oh, goodness.
All good. And I can share if need be.
Shoot, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Why don't you—
why they're not
stop sharing and I'll go for it. Make things—
Apologies. Okay. Sounds good.
Sorry.
Yeah, great. We can just keep scrolling on through there. Apologies again. So this is just a snapshot of some research that we conducted, how likely consumers at launch would be to replacing conventional chicken with cultivated chicken. And as you can see, a number of folks said that that our product, when they tasted it, tastes as good as or better than cultivated conventional chicken. And the vast majority were open to substituting conventional with cultivated. Next slide. This is just a snapshot of the various ways that we've brought our cultivated chicken to consumers, from fine dining establishments to food delivery via Food Panda, which is like an Uber Eats or DoorDash for Asia. We've done a variety of things to get our product in people's mouths. One of the most important things that we've learned is we've priced it at parity on the menu with conventional chicken dishes. So while we are certainly taking a loss at this stage on every dish that we sell, we felt like it was important to price our chicken dishes competitively to conventional chicken dishes on menus, whether it's at a fine dining establishment or a roadside hawker stall. Next slide. This is just a snapshot of one of the hawker stalls that we launched at, a chicken curry rice dish. And you can see that folks were eager to try it, lined up around the block for it. Next slide. This is a screenshot of the Food Panda delivery app that I mentioned. As I also mentioned, during the pandemic, there were lots of shutdowns, and so we had to get creative about how we delivered product to consumers. And we did that on the Food Panda app weekly. So every Thursday, folks could log in at a particular time and order one of several Good Meat cultivated chicken dishes to be delivered to their doorstep. We sell out every single day within minutes. Still need to increase production. This is another example of some of the out-of-home that we did. We took out billboards in partnership with Food Panda to promote the fact that people could order our cultivated chicken direct to their homes. Next slide. And again, just a sampling of various folks who joined us for a number of our dinners, talking about their excitement around cultivated meat. We've enlisted some pretty incredible chefs in our mission. Jose Andres, whom you probably all know, is going to be the first chef in the United States to put our chicken on his menu, one of his restaurant menus, when we get regulatory approval here. He's also joined the board of Good Meat and is an active advisor to the company. He's very passionate about sharing why he believes that cultivated meat will be on people's plates in the not so distant future, and is obviously a real advocate for food equity and access around the world. So it's great to have him in our corner. Another prominent chef, Francis Melman, he's known as the Carnivore King, and has very recently had his eyes open to the fact that we can't continue to sustain ourselves with the food system that exists today. And so he's a recent convert and is excited to eat our chicken and ultimately put it on menus in years to come. This is one of our latest attempts at introducing cultivated meat into the global conversation. We were fortunate enough to partner with the Singapore delegation and put our cultivated chicken on the menu at COP27, which is the UN climate change conference that took place last month in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. We hosted 2 days, 5 seatings, a number of media dignitaries, civil society, members of civil society, to come and actually experience our cultivated chicken. The newest version of our cultivated chicken that's going to be launching in Singapore in January. And here's just a sneak preview at where it will be launching. We're going to be launching with a butchery called Huber's in Singapore. And they're going to be the first butchery and bistro to put cultivated meat in their meat case. So excited for that, and eager to share that news with the world soon. That's it for me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you to all of you guys. Wonderful presentations. I think we have a great foundation to dive deeper into discussion on some of these topics. So I'd like to bring all the speakers back on screens. If you can turn on your camera. And Marika, I'll hand it over to you for the panel discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carlotta. I'm overwhelmed with joy to be here with you all, our fabulous panelists. Thank you for those presentations. My name is Marika Azoff. I'm GFI US's Corporate Engagement Specialist, and I lead our work with retailers, food service companies, and distributors. And I will be moderating this all-star panel. So just quick note, we would love for y'all to ask some questions. So please pop your questions in the Q&A, and we will save some time toward the end of this discussion to address those questions because we want to make this as relevant to you all as possible. Some of these questions might be slightly redundant, but I want to make sure that we hear from everyone on various topics. So to start out, I'll direct this first part of this first question to you, Andrew. I'm curious to hear who the cultivated meat consumer is in Singapore, and how have those demographics shifted at all since Good Meat's launch in Singapore? If they've shifted, it hasn't been that long, but just curious if you could paint a picture of who those consumers are.
Sure, absolutely. Happy to take it. Our first set of consumers, well, the first ever people to sit down at a table at a restaurant and enjoy cultivated meat were a group of middle school and high school students that we had handpicked in Singapore because they had a real commitment to building our food future. And so it was a symbolic first table, but a really important one because we wanted to show that it's the next generation and generations after them who are going to be the ones to ultimately save our planet and transform our food system. After that first table, we had a number of folks join us at 1880, at Madame Fan, and a number of other dining establishments. And the demographic of our guests were mixed. Lots of early adopter types, from investors to potential partners, chefs, academics, members of civil society, advocacy organizations, and just generally people who have a curiosity about and passion for embracing new types of food. They were motivated by environmental concerns, animal welfare concerns, and just a general curiosity around something that's new and different. Singaporeans, I think, generally are very open and excited about being the first to try new things, and this was no different. Now, where we really started to see a diversity of folks come sit at our tables was when we hosted our series of pop-ups with hawker stalls. So these are roadside stalls in Singapore that are very popular for people of all economic classes. They offer delicious food for a couple of bucks. And we partnered with a few very prominent hawker stalls on cultivated chicken pop-ups. And as my slide showed, the lines were around the block, and just a real microcosm of society. Young people, old people, people bringing their family members, people bringing vegan friends to try it, people bringing their most carnivorous friends and family to give it a try. So it really did span the spectrum. I think one of the things that we've learned is that if you're a Singaporean, and the same goes for Americans and other populations from what we've been able to glean, if you're a Singaporean and you're under, if you're 30 or under, you really don't have any big questions about your food being made in this way. If it's more sustainable and better for animal welfare, and it tastes great and ultimately will be accessible, they have no qualms about their food being made in a stainless steel vessel. If you're a little older, You may have more questions about how it's made, where it's made, what nutrients are used to grow the meat. But at the end of the day, tasting is believing, which is why we moved very quickly from our regulatory approval in Singapore to putting it on a restaurant menu. Even if it was in a small capacity and we're still very product constrained, we felt it important to put it out there and get people tasting it as quickly as possible and in a variety of different settings.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm still saving up for my ticket to Singapore. Hopefully we'll be able to try some in the US very soon.
I think a number of your colleagues have been able to try it in Singapore and in Egypt.
I'm incredibly jealous. And I'll turn the question kind of over to you. Carrie, we'll start with you, and then Sophie, and then Ben, if you want to chime in. Just curious, in your research, who you're seeing the cultivated meat and seafood consumer as being, and who will be those early adopters? And then if we have time, you could talk a little bit about how this might expand as the industry scales. So we'll start with you, Carrie.
I would echo Andrew that the research supports what he's seen in person, that there's interest across all demographics. We see that all the time. Every country research survey, there's a widespread interest. And although we find trends, for example, yes, younger, or more urban or more educated or higher income, those sorts of things, they're not huge differences that we see. So it's more, attitudinal differences that are going to be stronger predictors of who people are. That said, I think it's really, I would guess, related to your second question. People who are hesitant share the same kind of motivations. They're just not as strong as the early adopters. And that the other thing I just think is helpful to mention on the diet spectrum too, that, a lot of people may assume it's flexitarians who are interested in it, and they are, but there's a really large segment of heavy meat eaters too, who are very interested. And, especially when we're talking about, on the market early, it's novelty seekers. They're so excited about something unique to try in foodies.
Thanks, Carrie. Sophie or Ben, do either of you want to add to that, or I can move on to the next question if not?
Yeah, no, nothing major to add. Just I do think, being climate aware, understanding some of the macro trends around environment is something that we see as a big driver too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just one really minor addition from my side is that we found people who'd already had some familiarity with cultivated meat seem to be more likely to be interested in trying it. So I think pushing that familiarity and getting it in front of people, even if it is on a screen at first and not on a plate, is really important.
Absolutely. Thanks all. And kind of related to that, and I know some of you, Ben touched upon kind of the power of words and nomenclature, but I'd love to, I'm kind of, as someone who works at GFI, who lives and breathes alternative proteins, I sometimes struggle to really step out of my GFI brain and determine exactly how technical to get in my explanation of cultivated meat and seafood. And I imagine it's definitely a delicate balance. We want consumers to have enough information to make informed choices without overwhelming them with technical information. I'm curious, from your research and experience, what the most effective ways of communicating the science behind cultivated meat and seafood are. And why don't we start with Andrew?
Sure. So we're obviously also very much in the cultivated camp when it comes to nomenclature and the modifier. Ultimately, in the future, obviously, we want people to just call our meat, meat, our chicken's chicken, our beef is beef. But we do understand that we do need a modifier, and cultivated is where we've landed. We think that it's the most factual and neutral term that also resonates well with consumers and doesn't have that ick factor like sell does. So that's where we've landed, and it's heartening to see that many other companies, including Wild Type and groups like GFI, have also endorsed that term. At an international level, there's also a lot of harmonization happening around nomenclature. GFI and others pulled together a group of stakeholders in the US and in APAC and elsewhere to also advocate for cultivated being the term used in English language communication around this important field. So lots of progress made there. Like Ben said, I think the best way to communicate what this is if people can't taste it is through beautiful visuals, close-ups of our chicken, beauty shots of people eating it, video testimonials from guests who've experienced it have been really helpful. So at a number of our events in Singapore and in Egypt for COP27, we interviewed folks who sat at our tables and tasted it for themselves, and really asked for their unvarnished feedback. A comment card was placed at every seat, and is placed at every seat where we serve, regardless of the venue, because getting that feedback, that real-time feedback, is important for us as a company, for our product development team, and important for us as an industry. So that's another way that we collect feedback and hear from people about what they'd like to see next.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll pass it over to Sophie. Do you have anything to add? And then Carrie.
Yeah, I guess I touched on this briefly in the presentation, but in terms of finding that balance between explaining the science, but not getting too into the weeds of technical specifics, was using this greenhouse metaphor that GFI developed in 2019 as part of a nomenclature and sort of framing project. I think that really helps to give people a visual that they can then relate into an existing framework in their mind, and it just helps them to understand the process. So we basically say that in the same way that you would take a cutting from a plant, you would put it in some soil, put it in a greenhouse, give it the nutrients it needs to grow. In the same way, we take a cell from an animal and we give it, and that produces meat. That seems to help people to connect it with something familiar while also understanding how the process works.
Thank you, Sophie. I feel like I have so many follow-up questions, but I'm going to keep us on track so we can get to everything and also get to some of our audience questions. But I do invite all of you panelists, if I'm moving on, feel free, this can be fluid, just jump in and say, wait, I want to speak.
Actually, right before, I know you're trying to move on, but I do
no, it's great. It's great.
To share and think about is that we need to think about like where this messaging is occurring and when, because the messaging at a restaurant is going to be different. That's at a website, and the degree of technicality is going to vary widely and should vary widely in those contexts. And the other thing is thinking longitudinally. So people want to know this information and a lot of it up front, but that doesn't mean the second time they're eating it and the third time they're eating it, they're going to want to care to know about all that information. So the context is going to be important.
Absolutely. All right, this next question, we'll start with you, Ben. We have a lot of traditional food manufacturers in our link community, meat and seafood companies, and many of these players are already invested in the cultivated meat and seafood industry. But for those companies who have yet to incorporate cultivated meat or seafood into their business models, what roles do you really see these players taking in the space, the traditional food manufacturers and incumbent meat and seafood companies?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think for the most part, most cultivated meat and seafood companies will be running their own manufacturing. Unlike a typical, CPG, food or beverage startup that's leaning heavily on co-manufacturing. I think a lot of this will be in-house for a pretty long time. And so I think the biggest, place to dovetail into that is just across the supply chain, from raw inputs to added value inputs to logistics. We're going to need 3PLs. We're going to need all the same supply chain support to distribute and fulfill. So I think that's probably the biggest place.
Andrew, as another company in the space, do you have anything to add there on kind of the role of traditional food manufacturers and incumbents?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I can point to two relationships in particular that we have as examples of that. One is with ADM, a big agribusiness company. We are working with them to explore ways to make the nutrients that our cells need to grow more efficient and cheaper. And we announced that partnership as well as an investment from ADM not too long ago. And we've also partnered with the conventional meat industry to source cells. So one of our partners on our beef line is the Toriyama farm in Japan, which is one of the most prized Wagyu beef producers in the world. And we are working with them currently on R&D around a Wagyu beef line. So plenty of ways for conventional animal ag to get involved in the industry.
Thank you. Yeah, we're seeing that more and more. Incumbents investing in and partnering with cultivated meat and seafood companies. So important question for this community. This next question is for you, Sophie, and anyone else who wants to chime in. We've talked a lot about, how to communicate with consumers today, but sometimes the question is also who should be communicating with the consumers. Obviously, the cultivated meat and seafood companies play a very key role, but based on your research and experience, what other spokespeople can really drive consumer acceptance and understanding around the world?
Yeah, this was a really interesting aspect of our research. And we actually found unity across the whole board. So in all 4 of the markets we looked at, we found that people trusted dietitians and they trusted chefs the most when it came to cultivated meat. So it's great to see Andrew working with those famous chefs around the world. I think that's a really good move. People recognize that dietitians are real experts on the nutritional side. And that's one of the first things that comes to mind when they're thinking about what to eat. And then chefs, they just see as experts, obviously, on flavor and on quality, which is a really key aspect of the kind of purchase decision for people. We found that other spokespeople received more mixed reviews. So people were a little bit wary of companies because they know they have a bit of a vested interest, but then they also did want to hear from them about the processes that they use. And then we found scientists were trusted in some countries, but not so much in others. So again, it depends. You want to do that bit of market research to find out what's relevant in the market you're going for. But I think that chef and dietitian piece was so concrete across every market that I think that could well apply globally.
That's fascinating and not unexpected. They're artists and nutritionists. Very important. We're seeing a lot more chef engagement in the space. That's something also I'm personally working on, and we've seen Wild Type and Just Our Good Meat really dive into those partnerships. Does anyone have anything to add on that question before I turn over to some of our audience questions? All right, we have received quite a few. So Molly is going to just ask some of the questions from the audience, and then if we have time, I'll hop back in and ask a couple more panel questions. Take it away, Molly.
Awesome. Thanks, Marika, and thanks everyone for submitting such great questions. A reminder, you can do so in the Q&A box. So first question, I love this one. I guess Carrie and Sophie, you can start, and then we'll let everyone chime in. This question is, what are the most important outstanding consumer research questions or areas that could help the cultivated meat industry successfully launch in the market?
Other research has been on, full populations, and we need a lot more on our early adopters and people who are going to be going to upscale restaurants, and the more targeted we can be will be helpful. And also a lot of the research has presented, cultivated meat not as hybrid. And so I think, and not necessarily even a specific product. So the more you can get down to the product level, it's going to be, needed when, because now we've established, okay, people are going to eat it, but now the next step is how do we market it?
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And I guess just to add that I think there are lots of really key markets around the world that haven't yet had a proper deep dive into how consumers are responding to this. And then also I think going into testing a little bit more rigorously some of these messages and the way that the processes are described, just to really make sure we're using the right language, particularly in different languages. So we looked at the relevant languages for each of the countries that we looked at, but there's a huge gap around the world in just the huge range of languages that people speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew and Ben, anything to add there before we move to the next question? Awesome, thanks. So the next question I'll direct to you both. Someone asks, what are the main barriers in getting production costs of cultivated meat to parity with conventional meat? We know price is one of the largest drivers of food choice generally. And I'll drop a resource into the chat shortly. GFI has conducted some research on this, but I would love to hear from the companies on the call what the cost drivers you're looking at are and how you're successfully lowering the price of your product to appeal to more consumers.
Yeah, sure. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
No, how are you?
I will start out. I think that the two key hurdles are for us the nutrients that the cells need to grow. So creating a cheaper, more efficient and abundant nutrient base for the cells. And then also constructing larger and larger facilities, vessels. There have never been bioreactors or vessels of the scale that we need to ultimately produce commercially for avian and mammalian cell culture. And so a lot of work is going into that, technical engineering, scientific expertise going into scaling up into much larger bioreactors. So those are the two big key hurdles that we're seeking to address. And I'll also just quickly on your question about research that we'd like to see, and it pertains to this. I'd like to see more research around consumer pricing. So what we know that a lot of these products are going to be sold at a premium to start with, but how much are consumers willing to pay, and for what products, I think would be a really interesting exercise.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think, for us, just like Andrew said, it's the cost of a culture. So every run in a bioreactor and a cultivator, costs us a certain amount of money, and largely that's driven by the cost of the inputs, as Andrew said, but it's also driven by the conversion of those inputs. And so we think of like the two key problems in cell culture as hungry baby and dirty baby. And it's sometimes very difficult to understand which is the problem in a given culture that's either slowing down growth or inhibiting like the length of a culture. And so I think, for us, we could have lots of available nutrients still in the cultivator that aren't being able to be accessed because the cells have produced lactic acid or waste, just like we produce lactic acid when we go for a walk, but they're in a sealed, contained environment. And so for us, I think the media recycling or media rejuvenation, I think is a huge lever. So until we can really nail conversion, I think it's going to be it's going to continue to be too expensive. But I think that we have lots of levers to pull there. It's just about developing more sophisticated processes to grow our cells.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that was also a key takeaway of our techno-economic analysis that we published last year, that there were a lot of levers to pull, so a lot of kind of opportunities, and none of them sort of truly like intractable. So next question here is about the cultivated meat consumer, which I know we've discussed a little bit, but curious how the cultivated meat consumer might be different from the plant-based consumer and why someone might choose a cultivated product over a plant-based product, or maybe there is a lot of overlap in the motivations for consuming those. So we'll leave this up to all the panelists, whoever wants to jump in.
I mean, I can just start us off. I know Carrie and Sophie could probably speak way more eloquently and in way more depth about all the various consumer drivers. But I think that just the first comment is that it's a mistake to talk about plant-based consumers as a monolithic group. You know, this is a highly segmented group of consumers, just like every segment of consumers is increasingly broken up into different personas. These days, you can target people with different products, and we all have much more different consumer behavior between one and another consumers than ever before. And so the plant-based space is pulling in people with all different kinds of diets for all different kinds of philosophical reasons. And so I think just off the bat, it's important to understand that this is a pretty diverse group of people. It's also a pretty small percentage of at least in the American population. And so I think that we see most of our interest coming from people who are at least flexitarians.
I would add that there's a great deal of overlap. You may be eating both products, and that's in big surveys, general population. I will say that in focus groups of very targeted early adopters, that they were brought up quite a bit of disappointment around taste of plant-based products. So I think that this opportunity for like a really, really good taste is something that's a big driver for people that are wanting something different, but it's just falling flat for some people.
Awesome. Thank you. So this is the last question. I think we'll have time.
Molly.
Oh, we don't have time for another question.
Back in. I just want to make sure that we get one last quick question. Thank you all for the incredible questions. Thank you, Molly, for moderating that. Rapid fire round before I pass it to Carlotta to close us out. But if for each of you, just really one sentence, if you had unlimited resources but could only use them to increase consumer acceptance of cultivated meat and seafood, what would you focus on? What would you spend your unlimited resources on? Start with Sophie.
I'm going to do two things. I want to replace all of the laboratory images that we see in the media with beautiful food prepared images. And I want to assemble a sort of global task force of foodie influencers, chefs, just foodie people on Instagram and all of that to really speak out about the potential of cultivated meat in the kitchen. Amazing. Andrew.
I would second Sophie's decision making there. If we could scrub the internet of every petri dish slab of meat stock photo, I would be a happy guy.
Right there with you. Carrie.
Familiarity is the strongest predictor of acceptance. So anything around that. And I would love to see food trucks going across, if it's the US, going across the nation and offering samples and education so that people have an opportunity to try and experience it.
Samples are key. Ben.
Yeah, I think Carrie hit it on the head. I think the trial is the single most important lever. When we see people taste our product, as Andrew was saying, in their experience in Singapore, you really see like minds change right in front of you. So I do think driving trial through sampling, if we had unlimited money, I would be, in every grocery store in America with that little card table set up making sushi rolls for people.
I love it. All right. If we have any investors in the audience, which we don't really, but listen in. All right. Passing it over to Carlotta. I know we're a minute over. My apologies. We'll close out.
Thank you, Rika. No, that was such a wonderful discussion. So thank you to our speakers. Thank you, everyone who joined us today. Before we sign off Zoom and into Meet Away for networking, one quick note. As I mentioned before, after today's seminar, you will receive an email with a link to the recording, the presentations, and a feedback survey. We take your feedback very seriously as we really aim to make this group as useful for you all as possible. We are considering hosting a number of in-person events next year, and we'd love to know if this is something that would be of interest to you. So please do let us know in the feedback survey. All right, but now it's time for networking. Hop into the Meet Away link, which Marika will paste into the chat again. All you need to do is follow the prompts and you'll be paired with a new person every 5 minutes. You can also select who you'd like to meet with on the homepage, and there's an option to extend meeting time, take notes, share your contact info, etc. It's almost as good as in-person networking. So with that, thanks again, and see you next time.